You're watching Capital City Sunday.
Good morning this week on Capital City Sunday. The campaign blitz across Wisconsin.
I don't assume to have the votes of any demographic locked down. I have to earn their vote.
I love them. I have gone through the roof with black men.
The presidential candidates targeting key demographics of voters with just 15 days until the November election. Former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder joining me for analysis on efforts to engage black male voters.
He supports spending, just not for you.
Man, the one thing you have perfected in Washington is your ability to lie.
And candidates for Wisconsin's U.S. Senate race, Eric Hovde and Tammy Baldwin, take the debate stage, sparring on the issues most important to Wisconsin voters.
Wisconsin is going to be pivotal.
And as the latest Marquette Law School poll suggests, independent voters are struggling to find a home with either campaign, I spoke with independent Senator Bernie Sanders on the most pressing issues for this group of voters. Thank you for joining us. I'm Darielle Fair. With just about 2 weeks left on the campaign trail, Vice President Kamala Harris is launching her clearest efforts yet to target black men. The vice president made campaign stops in Milwaukee, La Crosse, and Green Bay last week. Her visit to Wisconsin comes as Harris announced her opportunity agenda for black men on Monday. A poll conducted by Howard University's Initiative on Public Opinion this month shows Harris leading Trump 84 to 8%, but the campaign has some concerns that it may be underperforming among black male voters.
My agenda is about tapping into the ambitions and the aspirations, knowing that folks want to have an opportunity. If they want, they should have a meaningful opportunity to build wealth, including intergenerational wealth.
Former President Donald Trump making stops in Nevada and Georgia this week, touting his recent gains with black men. The former president is performing better among black voters than any other Republican presidential nominee since the Civil Rights Act was enacted in 1964.
Any African American or Hispanic, and you know how well I'm doing there, that votes for Kamala, you got to have your head examined because they are really screwing you.
While Trump trails Harris by a wide margin in that demographic, Democrats have typically won these groups by such a large percentage that even modest support from black or Hispanic voters could shift outcomes. Here with me now is Eric Holder, former U.S. Attorney General. Eric, thank you so much for your time.
All right, good to see you.
Good to see you too. This week, Vice President Kamala Harris rolled out her opportunity agenda for black men in an effort to appeal to this critical voting bloc. Why do you think the Vice President is struggling to maintain the same level of support among black men as President Joe Biden, and former President Barack Obama?
Well, I think you're comparing numbers now. Where they ended up, that is President Obama and President Biden at the conclusion of the election. And we're still 2 weeks out when each candidate is still trying to make their case. I think if you look at Kamala Harris's economic agenda opportunity for black men, I think that's going to drive the numbers up. You know, talking about providing 1 million small business loans to African-American men, talking about mentorship, training programs, focusing on the health needs that African Americans have. Also, making sure that as opportunities become available in the burgeoning marijuana industry, that African American men have the ability to participate there. As I think that rolls out, and as African American men become more familiar with her, that those numbers will end up not only where they were with regard to Joe Biden. I think she will exceed those numbers. So, this is still a story to be told.
I've had a chance to speak with some black male voters, specifically here in Wisconsin, who have argued the Democratic Party takes them for granted and their policies have become too progressive. Is this a concern for the Harris campaign, and is she making her case to this voting bloc?
Yeah, I would really push back on the notion that the Democratic Party has somehow taken for granted, black folks. I'm the head of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. I've been in Wisconsin since 2017. and was a part of the dismantling of the unfair gerrymander that was put in place by Republicans back in 2011. I've been constantly in Wisconsin, campaigning for governors, for state legislators, for Supreme Court justices, and that is I'm a representative of the party that has shown a commitment to the welfare of the people of Wisconsin. And I think that Kamala Harris, in the way in which she's conducted this campaign, in a relatively brief campaign, has spent significant amounts of time in Wisconsin, has come up with, I think, Wisconsin-specific solutions to the problems that confront people in Wisconsin. And so I think that criticism is not necessarily warranted. And if people, again, will do their homework, study just a bit to see, who is saying what has Kamala Harris been proposing, how many times has she been to the state, they'll be satisfied that the Democratic Party generally and Kamala Harris specifically are doing right by the residents of the great state of Wisconsin.
Last week, former President Barack Obama called out Black men for what he says are excuses not to support a woman president, the former president receiving some Black backlash for his comments. But I want to get your thoughts on his messaging here.
Yeah, I think that President Obama was raising an issue that should be considered by, some Black men in the community, and asking, why is it that you would not support a candidate who is as qualified as she is? Is there something other than, an assessment on the merits that keep you away from that support? So I think it's a legitimate question to ask. And what I would say is that I think every African-American man who doesn't support Kamala Harris, given who Donald Trump is, and that's what I think people need to remember. This is the guy who started the birther conspiracy, racist birther conspiracy about Barack Obama, who called for the execution of the Central Park five innocent young Black guys, whose company was sued by the Justice Department for not renting to African Americans. If that's a guy who you think you can support and not support an eminently qualified Black woman, then I think you need to step back and ask yourself the question, what is it that keeps you from supporting her? Because I think on the merits, the choice is stark and the choice is very, very clear. Kamala Harris is better for the African American community. Kamala Harris is better for the nation.
I want to switch gears slightly here, Eric. The Republican National Committee has an election integrity initiative across key swing states like Georgia, Michigan, Arizona, and here in Wisconsin to train poll watchers and intervening in the ballot and registration processes in those states ahead of the election. Could these efforts lead to voter intimidation in November?
Well, that's certainly my concern. The Republican effort is all premised on the notion that somehow there is voter fraud that exists in these states. And there's no empirical proof that there is any significant voter fraud in any of those states. And so the question then is, well, what are you all looking for? What is it that you are really trying to do? And I think one of the questions, or one of the concerns that I have, is that you're not trying to root out fraud. You're just trying to intimidate certain people from actually voting. You don't see these same squads, or whatever it is that they call them, in states like California or New York or Texas or Florida. They're only concerned, apparently, about the integrity of the vote in the battleground states. And so I think, given the history that we have seen from the Republican Party, and especially recently with regard to voter suppression, things that they have put in place, the purging of certain voters from the rolls, that what this effort is all about is really not to protect the integrity of the system, but to try to game the system so that Republicans can win, even though they might not have sufficient popular support. They're afraid of the very people who they say they actually want to represent.
Former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder. Eric, thank you so much for your time again.
All right. Thanks for having me.